Well, hello and welcome. I'm really excited that you're able to join us today to hear from leaders in law enforcement about how community perspectives impact the delivery of local police services. My name is Matt Fulton, and I'm the Vice President of National Engagement for POLCO. We help communities build stronger engagement and track performance based upon resident and business sentiment. Today, we've just got an excellent panel assembled to share their perspectives on putting police needs and expectations into a community context. We're going to be talking about the challenges that law enforcement agencies are facing in understanding, managing, and responding to public safety needs of the community and for those that they all serve, particularly in today's environment where communities nationally are so disrupted because of the pandemic, civil unrest, economic uncertainties, and community polarization. The goal today is that you'll learn something. You'll take away a new idea. You'll have a fresh perspective or maybe get a new strategy. We want you to hear from these leaders in law enforcement so that you can benefit in your own environment on how to do your job better in meeting the needs of the community. Here's the format for the conversation today. We're going to take a few minutes to introduce each of the panelists. And we'll give an opportunity for them to talk a little bit about their backgrounds, and then I'll kick off the conversation to help set the stage. I'm going to be asking questions that will draw out important perspectives and strategies that focus on the area of law enforcement and building in that community perspective. And then following the panelists' responses, we'll give a little bit of an opportunity for them to ask questions of each other, and then we will wrap it up with a few final comments. And if that sounds fine, why don't we get underway? Our first panelist is Brad Wise, who's the police chief in Coon Rapids, Minnesota. Brad began his employment with the city of Coon Rapids in 1995 as a patrol officer and became the chief in 2011. I've had the pleasure of working with Brad when I was a city manager in Coon Rapids, which is one of the reasons why it's so nice to have him on this panel today. Coon Rapids is Brad's hometown. And his commitment to the community is one of the reasons why I admired the way that he led his department and by the amount that he is engaged in the community in everything that he does, not only as an individual, but with his family. Brad is this natural leader that has been just excellent for the community of Coon Rapids and for leading the department. Brad, thanks for being here. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about your background.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. That was a really nice introduction. I appreciate your kind words. Yeah, it's like in my case is that my law enforcement career led me to my hometown, which I think was a really big advantage where I had an understanding of how the community operated and sort of can feel the vibe of the community itself. And I know we'll get into this later, but of course, the relationship piece as a police chief is a big deal. And I had a natural avenue towards building relationships with other leaders in the city, such as the superintendent, principals of all the schools, various businesses that were larger. It was just sort of a natural progression for me. So growing up in the town, and even just the pride I felt in being the police chief, the local boy done good sort of mindset was really helpful for me. And it's something that I brought to the workplace every day. And it's something really that I try to focus on with the young officers that are coming into the profession, particularly in my agency is, of course, we always like to have new officers that grew up in the town themselves. We're a town of 63,000, so we do have a pool of candidates, but even if they're not from the town, I talk about things like, for the newest of officers is if you choose to live in the area or live in the city, is that things I like to encourage is for officers, for instance, if their kids are playing baseball and they happen to be working, is that I like when the officers go to the baseball game and they're visible, those sorts of things. But it's that relationship piece, but it can't be phony. It's got to be real. And I just took advantage of being a local person, but I think it's something that could be done if I had gone to an agency other than my hometown, if I had the mindset of I'm a part of this community and I'm not just providing a service to it, I'm a member of it. And those relationships are really valuable for me. So that's my thoughts.
Yeah, that's great, Brett. I'm really thankful that you are willing to spend some time with us. Our second panelist is Captain Mike Canfield. Mike is a captain for the Mountain View, California Police Department, which is situated, as most of us know, in the heart of Silicon Valley. Mike's been with the department for 22 years, seen a lot of changes over the last couple of decades, and has held numerous positions in the department as he's advanced in his current role, where he's in charge of the department's patrol and uniformed operations. Mike is a recognized leader. He's been the recipient of Mountain View's Distinguished Service Medal and proudly shares a notorious unit citation. I've gotten to know a little bit about the department and the community just through these panel conversations over the last several months. And Mike, thanks for being here. And I really appreciate what you bring to the job and the value of the importance of serving in a community like Mountain View. But would you mind just sharing a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Matt. And thank you, Chiefs, for having me here on the panel today. It's really an exciting time to be in law enforcement leadership. And for me, coming from a childhood where and an upbringing where community engagement was really part of who we were, policing and the expectations of policing now as they've evolved in the last maybe 5 or 6 years and dramatically in the last year has really been foundational in my success and been really important for me to connect and driven my connection and engagement with the community. So it's really an exciting place to be in Mountain View is the heart of Silicon Valley, but it's really interesting as far as we're driven for initiative, but we have a large disparity and kind of educational gap. So although we are tech and innovation centric, we really have to have a broad range of approach. And so it's a great place to be. And I'm excited to be in law enforcement leadership now and excited to be on the panel today.
That's great, Mike. Thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. And I'm very excited to introduce Doug Larsson, who has a career in law enforcement that actually exceeds my time frame in public sector, Doug. Doug's experience has actually spanned more than 4 decades. He started back in the 70s and rose through the ranks, become chief of police of 3 Chicago area police departments, as well as the chief deputy of the Lake County Sheriff's Office before coming to the village of Bayside, Wisconsin in 2018. Until recently, and for 22 years, Doug has been an adjunct instructor at Northwestern University Center for Public Safety, where he's taught leadership, communication, and strategic initiatives. He's a graduate of the FBI National Academy and the School of Staff and Command, and has spoken around the country and in Britain on the importance of institutionalizing a culture of fairness and outreach. Doug and I have known each other for probably a little bit more than a year, and I've just been very impressed with my interactions with Doug, and I'm really looking forward to his comments today during this discussion. Thanks, Doug. You want to add a little bit more on about your background? Oops, Doug, I'm sorry, you're on mute.
I learned a trick that if you press the space bar down, it's supposed to unmute you. So apparently that trick's not working today. Matt, thanks for that. As I hear that, I wonder why would anybody want to do this job as long as I have? And yet, to echo Captain Canfield's remarks, this is a really exciting time to be in law enforcement because we're in transition again. And I have seen transitions over the decades where almost a tsunami of social change washes over us. Somehow we reinvent ourselves. We come out of it stronger. We come out of it more resilient. We're able to meet the needs of the community even better. And we will get through this. The criticisms will disappear. The confidence will return. And the abilities of our young officers will only be as good as their leadership. And so this is a great time to be in law enforcement. Don't listen to anybody who says it's not.
Thanks, Doug. And thanks to all of you for being part of the panel conversation. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. The topic we're going to be exploring today is putting police needs and expectations into a community context. Public safety is such an important community responsibility. It impacts every aspect of a community's ability to present itself to the world. The importance of overall safety, the importance of overall quality of life. It has direct impacts on economic quality and vibrancy. As a former city manager of over 3 decades, I just have such a great appreciation and respect for the complexities and the challenges that are needing to be confronted by law enforcement agencies and personnel, and just simply meeting the public safety needs and expectations of the community. And the expectations are high. It is easy to take public safety for granted until your services are needed. And police departments are challenged every day with overlapping, nonstop, and evolving situations that need to be handled professionally, respectfully, and responded to in an appropriate manner. You're needing to consistently adapt to changing community demographics that are changing faster, it seems, all the time. You also have organizational demands that have been impacted over the past year with the pandemic and other aspects. So the responsibilities that you have and the expectations you have really put you at the forefront of leading in a community. And then you add on a global pandemic, a very polar political environment, higher unemployment and business disruptions, racial equity, social justice. I mean, it just requires your leadership role to be on target all the time. You've got many who are placing very high expectations on your performance, and failure, as you all appreciate, can result in significant community impacts that generally will have an impact on trust and overall satisfaction, and can be generational in nature. So how do you go about understanding the current needs of the community and being able to manage and meet them with the added expectation of being able to demonstrate trust, accountability, and equity for everyone? We know through our research that over the past 2 years, there's been a meaningful shift in resident sentiment nationally about local police services. The community unrest over the past year has impacted levels of trust, accountability, and public safety priorities. And while it's really interesting to see where the shifts in sentiment are overall, it's really noteworthy to point out that the areas where resident priorities actually increased were those that focus on building stronger relationships and connections with the police department. So that relationship between police departments and the community is actually increasing in importance over the last couple of years. This is all based on our National Police Services Survey, which is one of our benchmark surveys that is designed to help communities get a comprehensive understanding of how your residents look at public safety issues and priorities in your community. It's really helpful to be able to understand those perspectives for realigning resources based on that perspective. Certainly helping for you as you're starting to consider modifying police operations or policies. Incorporating that community perspective is such an important aspect. And so today, our discussion is really intended to hopefully help us explore the connections between local policing and how residents contribute to this responsibility. So here are the 3 questions that we're going to be exploring. What role should the community play in guiding or influencing the delivery of local police services? What strategies do you use for managing community expectations? And then finally, what tools and methods do you use to understand resident expectations and priorities regarding local police services? And for the first question, I would love to start with you, Chief Wise. What role should the community play in guiding or influencing the delivery of police services in Coon Rapids?
Well, for sure in Minnesota, it's why communities have police departments in the first place. If they didn't want engagement or direct influence over their police department, they would simply contract with the sheriff's office, which would be less expensive. So their expectations are high. Obviously, the traditional model of city council members is important, and we encourage that level of communication through council members because access is always the hard part. In my town, we're roughly 63,000 residents, and there's only so many people that we can have a direct impact on. So when it comes to police service, what I'm finding is that the sentiment that people develop by watching television news or reading a variety of things is what in large part drives their perception, I think, of their own police department. I mean, we've done community surveys for a long time to get citizen feedback. And of course, it's always positive, but there's part of me that goes, a significant percentage of that positive feedback is it comes from people who don't even know us regardless. So in that sense, then we rely on our city council, and then we've taken various forms for direct engagement where we seek out especially diverse communities. We're a relatively diverse community, especially considering that the younger population is more diverse than the older population. And, we've learned some lessons along the way too on what's effective engagement with diverse populations that may not follow the traditional model of, I have a police issue, I'm going to go to my council member and then I'll let my council member address it. Because certainly what the George Floyd incident brought up in the last year is that people are feeling a sense of passion within themselves and they want to do something right now. And they're not willing to wait for the gears of government to move slowly. And so it's basically, in my mind, it has speeded up the need to make an effective response that that really lets my city know that they're being listened to.
Brad, are you, Coon Rapids has got such a strong commercial base. Are you interacting much with your business community on public safety issues?
Yeah, because, well, for sure, crime trends have changed, and especially in the large retail mall area, is that the volume and the kinds of thefts that they've experienced have been more aggressive. And so accordingly is that we've done more staff training for those businesses to ensure that they have safe confrontation, because it's been like, instead of shoplifting 10 years ago of being an individual coming in to commit a shoplift, instead it'll be a group shoplift, like a grab and go, and sometimes it can create a fair amount of fear. So yeah, the especially the retail community is important, and we disengage it directly by having a person assigned to our retail sector. I mean, that's just the way that we do. But still, it's the business community, for the most part, aren't the voters that are wanting to see the way we do policing different. So it's the piece that I worry about most is the citizens, and it's not. And I'm sure the other law enforcement leaders here will agree. There, you have your diehard supporters where you don't worry about. You have your diehard detractors where there's nothing you can do. It's the people in the middle, or the people that are either leaning towards detractor to leaning towards supporter, is where we try to focus our energy.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you. Captain Canfield, what role should the community play in guiding or influencing the delivery of police services in Mountain View?
Well, I think it's really important from a kind of conceptual idea for us as law enforcement, and certainly in Mountain View, to realize that we belong to our community. I've heard, decades ago, officers say, "This is my city," maybe when dealing with a suspect in the field, but really this is their city and this is their police department. So we are there for them. We are the subject matter experts, but we really need to lean on our communities to know what's important to them. And one of the strengths and weaknesses, I suppose, of our American policing system is how decentralized it is. So we have, and our communities have, the ability to have significant impacts in our services and the things that we provide. And so in Mountain View, we've really worked very hard to reach out and develop engagement to understand the types of things, especially in very rapidly evolving circumstances like we saw last year, what it is that's important to the communities and what types of services they're wanting to receive. And having said that, it doesn't mean that every community gets every resource that they want. Having been a traffic lieutenant, I understand that traffic is a very passionate aspect of communities, and many communities have traffic concerns and they want an officer at every intersection, and it's just not feasible. But managing those expectations, engaging with the community, really allows us to bridge that gap and provide the services that are best needed for them.
Mike, in Mountain View, have you sensed over the last couple of years a shift in community engagement levels with your police department?
Absolutely. We've seen, even before 2020 and the pandemic and the death of George Floyd, we've seen a change in the culture in our city, pretty rapid change, both as it relates to community and social engagement and our policing services that we provide. we have in California, and especially in the Bay Area in California, a large homeless population and unstably housed population. And that brought in and generated a lot of people living in vehicles in our town. And the services related to those became, and the expectations of our police department, both from providing community services as well as quality of life and enforcement issues, was rapidly evolving and very palpable and very emotional to many aspects of our community, and really required us to be engaged, very closely engaged, and keep our finger on the pulse of what was important, both to the community and what was the right thing to do in those circumstances, and meeting that balance.
Yeah, I would imagine that I've been hearing a little bit about the issues that you're needing to contend with all of those the living in the vehicle aspect. That's got to create just a completely it's a unique aspect that in the Midwest we probably don't appreciate as much as is impacting your department. So that's very interesting. Chief Larsson, what role should the community play in influencing the delivery of police services in Bayside?
So I love what Chief Weiss said about who our audience is. And if you imagine the bell curve, we're really looking at that central core group that's listening to each side and not sure where they want to land in terms of their opinion. I want to take everybody back to maybe perhaps what Captain Canfield would remember. Back in the 60s, there was this TV show called Dragnet. And that era, that 1950s, early 60s era of policing all came down to trust. Trust is that social capital that we need to do our job. And without the trust in our communities, we're just never going to get it done. So building trust from that particular model was even though it's kind of arcane and almost amusing, we left the cop on the beat concept where everybody knew the police officer who walked their 6-block area. They trusted him. He knew all the nuances of the families and the businesses, and that truly was his community. Then we advanced into this professional model, just the facts, ma'am. We're the professionals. Stand back. We're going to do our job. And from there, we went to this 80s model of ambassador police work. We're going to have one officer assigned as the community relations officer, and he'll be our liaison to the community. Well, what happened? Everybody went to him or her because they established a dialogue and some trust with their one police officer in a community of 30,000, maybe more people. And that police officer couldn't possibly handle all the questions and concerns that the people had. So now let's take it forward a little bit. We go to this community policing philosophy. We're still trying to figure that one out until we get back to today's world. And now we're hearing what? We don't trust the police. Well, if that's true, it's because we haven't had the opportunity to build the trust like we did before. And so yes, the short answer is yes, the community absolutely should have a say in what we do, not how we do it, but what's important to them. And if it's within our ability to give that to them and we deliver it, now that the trust begins to build because we're keeping our promise. They begin to understand that maybe not everywhere else in Milwaukee County, but certainly in Bayside, the police will give us what we have asked for.
One of the things I've always been impressed of with what I understand about the way that you lead your department is your neighborhood focus. I know already that it's going on in Coon Rapids, and I would have to also suspect in Mountain View. But can you talk a little bit about how you're engaging your residents? I know we're going to talk probably about it a little bit later too, but just kind of touch on how you're engaging at that level and why.
Yeah, and with a lot of respect to both Brad and Mike, running a big department is tough. Running a small department is, I think, in some ways tougher because I've managed bigger departments, had a lot of resources and a lot of people that were so talented at what they did. Here, we're all kind of generalists. And so in Bayside, population of under 5,000 people, you guys, we divided our community up into 8 small sectors, and my day shift and afternoon shift are responsible for one of those sectors. There might be 300 rooftops in their sector, but they are essentially the police chief in their sector, and their job is to go out and make a connection in a variety of different ways. It's gotten a little harder since COVID. Make a connection with their residents and let the residents see them as the kind of the modern day cop on the beat. So we call it My Blue. It's a simple model that's constantly evolving. It's a very dynamic model that it's probably in its 3rd iteration just in 3 years. And as Brad said, you really only hear from the people that really like you. We're out there trying to find the ones that don't have an opinion or watch too much TV or, you know, that kind of thing. So it's a slow success story, but it's working.
And all based on building that trust.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks, Chief. Let's move on to the second question. And Captain Canfield, we'll start with you on this question. What strategies do you use for managing community expectations in Mountain View?
One of the main strategies we've used and we've been early adopters of is the utilization of our social media platforms, and really using them not just to tell our story and to show our humanity, but to really use them as a two-way communication medium and engaging with our community, and then also listening to what our community is saying in that medium about us, not with us, but with each other. That's been really important for us to engage and measure the sentiment and the things that are important to the community. But also we've taken a much more active role in outreach, especially after the death of George Floyd. We did a significant amount of community member and community stakeholder engagement. So people who perhaps on social media made disparaging comments or concerned comments about our police department, we literally, the police chief or myself would message them, ask if they have time to talk. It was tricky because of COVID, but work around our COVID restrictions and literally sit down and have a conversation about what it is that is concerning to those community members and how they see the kind of national policing narrative and how we see our local policing narrative. Not trying to change minds, but really just trying to create and generate dialogue. And from that, those engagements and those types of engagements with stakeholders and community members, we created a kind of roughly a program called MVPDX, which is roughly based on TEDx talks and a Citizens Academy. And what we did was we recruited from many of our detractors or persons who had sincere concerns about policing, as well as kind of a wide range of community members. And we created what ended up being, unfortunately, virtually or almost completely all virtual course, a 12-week course where we meet and discuss different aspects of the police department, our processes, our procedures, as well as share our human stories and kind of success stories and engage in dialogue with the community. Some of the early takeaways from that program, speaking about our unstably housed community, we have a community outreach officer who specifically engages with them and helps provide services to them. As we were selecting our next one, our MVPDX cohort from our second session, what we call cohort 2, they wanted to know why we only interviewed this person and didn't bring in outside NGO involvement into the selection of the person, since there was such heavy interaction with our NGOs. It seemed like a great idea, and we literally, within, I think, 3 days, created a new board where we brought in a member of a fantastic local community services association, and the president of that association helped us provide feedback and selection of that officer. So those types of very quick and rapid changes have been really successful for us. And we're looking now, as we create a public safety advisory board for our city, we're looking to draw from some of those same successes and some of those cohorts that we've used to generate that group of people providing insight into what they would like from their police department.
Mike, I've heard a little bit about your virtual academy in the past, which I'm very impressed with, and so congratulations on that. And I also am really impressed by how you're following through with what your cohorts are providing you with input. It ties back into Doug's point about you build trust by your demonstrated actions, right? And so that's great. Mountain View's unique community with probably extremely high expectations. Are there any particular tips in terms of the most effective ways to manage resident expectations that you have used in Mountain View that other people might benefit from?
Well, I think certainly, engaging in it depends on the different communities are going to have different methods. So for our community, it tends to be very engaged in social media platforms, and it provides us with an opportunity to create opportunities to engage and communicate with them. Certainly, social media is not a panacea. It's not a silver bullet for solving problems, but it's created a method for us to connect and then create different and more deep and meaningful relationships with our community, and engaging in dialogue, not trying to change minds, but engaging in dialogue from, and finding our community members through our social media platforms has been really successful. I would say that I think as important as branding and messaging and telling our story on those platforms is, it's not going to be what fixes, big air quotes, but fixes police community relations. But it is a tool that we can use to bring us to that, to bring our human connection to people.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you. Chief Larsson, what strategies do you use in Bayside for managing community expectations?
So part of the problem is discovering what those expectations are, and we don't seem to hear a lot from people other than what they might need for the moment. So for us, I really rely on those sector officers, those 8 police officers, to report back to me in a quick and easy fashion, nothing elaborate, on what they're hearing, what's needed out there, and frankly, we all know this, that managing crime is not near as hard as managing the fear of crime. And so the demographics of this community is pretty much skews to the older resident, a lot of fear of being a victim. We know that. We rely on social media as much as the older resident knows how to work it. The rest of the community, frankly, is a hardworking community. It's a community of professionals, community of, our communities of interest tend to run from moms that stay at home, moms that work, dads that work at home, dads that travel a lot, just like everywhere else in a metropolitan area. And the hardest part is getting the word back from them. So for us, it's block parties, it's the one-on-one contact, it's the drive-by birthday greetings when you're dealing with a pandemic, it's ice skating with kids in their backyard. It's everything that we can do one-on-one, and I really rely upon those police officers to do this for me.
Yeah, that's great. And do you have any kind of a set program or anything that you suggest to a community for doing that outreach or block parties, or any tips that you would suggest?
I kind of bridle at the saying, there's not an original thought in government, and I understand where it comes from. We all tend to copy successes from each other, but the tried and true successes really are the small groups, small group meetings, small group coffees, the neighborhood parties. So my advice to somebody who wants to do something a little bit different in what we're doing is, first sit down with your cops and ask them, how much are you willing to invest in this silly idea of mine? Bring in some voices of the community that will speak clearly to you and not just tell you what you want to hear. Involve your political body. They have to have a say in this. There has to be buy-in. But most of all, don't be afraid to try something new. And as much as we like to think we're risk takers in police work, we're not. Don't be afraid to fail. Risk taking means failure, and sometimes failure after failure will bring you your greatest success.
That very well stated. Very good point, Doug. Thank you. Chief Wise, what strategies do you use in Coon Rapids for managing community expectations?
Well, I guess I would like to echo what Captain Canfield said too, or even the chief about social media is really important. And I would say, like in our case, we monitor a lot of social media. Nextdoor.com is a big deal in Minnesota. It's used a lot. I'm not sure if it's used in other places as much, but all these neighborhoods that are connected via Nextdoor where they're talking to each other. Our police department has a presence in each one of those neighborhoods. So we know if a police issue pops up, that we can insert ourselves into that conversation. So for example, it'll be one neighbor will tell the other neighbor on Nextdoor, I saw somebody poking around cars last night. And then invariably it leads to, did you call the police from somebody else in the neighborhood? And probably 50% of the time the answer is no. And then that's where the people that we have monitoring social media jump on and say, it would be great if you called the police. We'd like to, maybe we won't catch them, but it might be related to something else that we know of. And so it's impossible to understate the importance of that. The second piece is our approach. You know, we have 69 sworn officers here. They have varying degrees of ability to engage with people. Some are total introverts that have a hard time talking socially to anybody, and others are very gregarious. And we put a lot of effort into leveraging the gregarious members of our department. And probably the best decision I ever made was for our city is called a Heart Safe City, where we took on the challenge of teaching hands-only CPR and AED use. Well, it turns out we decided to start that program, but because of my relationship I had with the school district actually has a curriculum requirement that kids graduate with an American Red Cross certification for CPR and AED use. So we married those two things. We had our people with the skill to teach combined with the school's need to provide that curriculum for the kids. And now, like 5 years later into this program, and people don't believe it when I say this, we have something approaching 25,000 people in Coon Rapids alone that we've taught hands-only CPR. And my one officer who trains this is amazing and engaged. He's been invited overseas to talk about starting a heart safe program. But I would tell you that this city as a whole, probably 50% of the population knows him. His name is Brian Platts. And the people who know him absolutely adore him. And the social capital we gain from just that heart safe program, which has clearly nothing to do with arresting anyone, can't really be understated. So, but as far as managing expectations goes, the other piece I guess I'd like to talk about is that, so one of the things that we do is just the way the officers work their hours. They're scheduled to work less than 2,080 hours in a year. Generally speaking, it's something between 50 to 60 hours of time that they owe to the city. Is that we allow the officers to make up that time with any community related event that they have an interest in, whether it's coaching or speaking to a group or Cub Scouts or whatever it is. And those sets of ears wind up being invaluable. And one of the messages that I send with those officers when you talk about expectations is obviously mental health is very topical, particularly the ability to de-escalate in a mental health situation. And for sure, the media has created the perception that everyone in mental health crisis can be de-escalated, when all of us in law enforcement know there's a significant percentage of people in a mental health crisis that there is no de-escalating. And so the story I arm all these people with, in fact, my whole department knows the story and can recite it, is that in 2015, Coon Rapids Police responded to 500 mental health calls for service. 18 of those calls were at the hospital. We have a hospital in our city. 5 of those mental health calls for service were to the mental health ward of the hospital. And the only skill that the officer who showed up at the mental health ward had beyond the psychiatrist was the ability to use force. We were expected to use force, and it was the reason that we were called. And I tell that story, or I give that information to the officers. So again, it's managing that expectation because it makes me crazy when you see on the news, mental health crisis, officers use force, and somehow that force was always wrong, because why didn't he or she just de-escalate? And it's one of those things that we work hard to educate. And the captain talked about Citizens Academy. Virtual Academy is great, because I think people need to understand. They see the videos, but that doesn't mean they understand what police are doing still and why.
Yeah, and I know that you've had the academies in Coon Rapids. Brad, congratulations on the Heart Safe program. What a great statement for the community. I love the way that you have built that relationship with the schools in such a unique and positive way. I think that's just simply outstanding. I had no idea that you had that many graduates in town, but what a great connection to the community. So congratulations on that.
Well, let me just add that, and the way we do it with the school is that the school, because it's a graduation requirement for the school has every ninth grader sign up for the class, and it's my officer who teaches the class. So literally every ninth grader in the entire city is automatic for being trained in hands-only CPR and AED use. So yeah. It's like a built-in engagement thing that's super valuable to us.
Well, and the value of it isn't even so much you're learning a very important skill, but you're also building that relationship with, then gets back to Chief Larsson's point on trust, right? That whole relationship building. So that's just excellent. Let's move on to the third question. And Chief Larsson, I'd like to start with you. What tools and methods do you use to understand resident expectations and priorities regarding local police services in Bayside?
The tools are slim. I'll be honest with you. One of the things that, and Matt, I know this is going to sound like a shameless plug, and you did not ask me to do this. So here it comes. We are looking forward to some type of instrument that is easy to distribute to our residents and easy to understand what they're asking of us. That's what we're hoping to get to this year. Right now, it is just the basic. Next door is certainly popular here in the Milwaukee area, sometimes too popular. Facebook, of course, and that, but we really do rely on the one-on-one. And the problem is, and just like Chief Weiss said, not every police officer is totally in tune with the same enthusiasm that I might have for this program. But they're required to make minimum number of contacts every month. They're required to report. And one of the questions I ask them is, what's going on that we didn't know about before in your sector? And so it's not quite word of mouth, but it really is that one-on-one kind of search out and seek to understand mission.
The question, you're asking your sector officer, what is the one new thing, always helps you to explore deeper into the neighborhood. So I think that's a great tip for doing that kind of engagement. Any other aspects of things that you're doing at the neighborhood level that you think people would benefit from?
Well, so oddly enough, and this is worth mentioning, at least for communities like ours, we are a high service community, meaning we do our own garbage collection. Before I got here, the departments didn't necessarily talk to each other. They all got along, but they didn't really communicate. And what we found out was, the one man who drives the route to pick up the refuse in town probably knows more about what's going on day to day in the community because he talks to the kids, he talks to the parents, he sees the homes. He probably knows more than any one police officer knows. So, we've kind of just developed that natural resource here. And then from that, we built a communication model with another program, another process that helps Village Hall employees, the fire department, the police department, and DPW talk to each other about what the needs are. The whole idea is achieving village excellence. And if we all do this and we're not going in different directions, it becomes a whole lot easier to discover what the needs are. Quick story. We all have the elderly in our communities. We found out that there was an elderly woman who was truly in distress. By all appearances, she was fine. Her house was in order, but it was because of neighbors who trusted their sector officer, who said, you know, I don't think something's right there. And we were able to get her help. She's healthy now, and we're just excited for little victories like that.
Yeah, but those are important victories. And I love the fact, Doug, that you bring up the cross-departmental aspect of it, because I always, as a city manager, I think every employee in one way or another relates to public safety, right? And so the notion of using all of your frontline employees in a community can help you deliver police services and identify issues and stay on top of the topics that are going to be impacting your community, if not today, probably tomorrow. I think, thanks for bringing up that point. I think that's a really, really important point. Chief Wise, what tools and methods do you use to understand resident expectations and priorities regarding local police services in Coon Rapids?
The good news now is 12 months into the pandemic, at least I know where the mute button is in a second here. But yeah, I think we covered a lot of those topics, but one of the things that's kind of interesting, I'm gonna shift gears slightly, because it's easy to get disconnected from where your community is at. And like I said, I mean, this is my hometown, and I can't even count the number of people that I know. That said, we have a new city council member that just started in January, who I'm just learning to get to know. And as a new council member, among my highest priorities, and it should be for any police leader, is to know your council members on a personal level, know where they're at, their worldview, and inspire confidence in them. It's a big deal. But her words to me were that she ran on a social justice platform, which I totally understand, but actually it surprised me that she won in my city, only in the sense is that we're a suburb and historically pretty politically conservative suburb. And her saying that as like, that was the emphasis of her campaign. And I'm thinking, property taxes, and do the streets look good, and is the fire department effective, and all this. I'm thinking like that, and she's talking social justice, and learning about her and learning the voices that she had listened to while she was campaigning, where she said, I tell her all the great things I'm doing to keep engaged, and she says, and it wasn't a criticism, she just said, well, I heard from people who say that they're afraid of you, and they don't, you meaning the police department, and they're not interested in talking to you, that the people that she was referring to are more tied into the things that are happening in Minneapolis. And and I'm sure that Wisconsin and California is feeling the aftermath of what happened in Minneapolis and the George Floyd, but we're really feeling it here, because we're getting, our police department, for instance, is being asked to assist with the security for the upcoming trials and so on. And council members are skittish about our officers being present. And there's a whole lot of conversation to take place regarding that. But to hear from this new council member that there are people that are afraid of us and don't even want to talk to us was virtually shocking for me, and speaks to a gap that somehow I need to address. And it's not about winning people over. If somebody's position is, I'm afraid of you, to me that sounds as you just don't know me or know us. And so how to go about reaching that, that'll be, this is new to me, so this is something that we'll team up and try to hash out ourselves. The one thing that we're talking about is, like in California, they're talking about the Citizens Academy, is that we're talking about merging a multicultural advisory group with our Citizens Academy that doesn't operate on the 10 lessons and then it's done. It's going to operate more along the lines of however many people want to participate, we'll do it once a quarter, and then just have it be ongoing, so that it'd be a safe forum, I guess, for people to get to know us. But I guess I'm not really getting at your tools type question, but it was more just telling you what's new and different and what can be surprising, because it certainly was not a conversation I was expecting to have in the last month.
Brad, I think it's really interesting. Our research will show, or does show, that less than 50% of the population has actually had an interaction with the police department over the last 12 months. And the impact of that, of course, is that people's perspectives around law enforcement and the delivery of law enforcement in so many ways is being shaped by the things that are happening around them, but not really personal experiences. That's one of the things I really love about this National Police Services Survey, because you're actually able to isolate out the actual experiences that people have had with your department. And I would suspect, given the history and the interactions that you're doing, like with the school and the Heart Safe community, that if you were to isolate out those people that have actually had interactions with the community, you'll get a much deeper appreciation for those interactions and the kinds of interactions and the reputation of the department, which I suspect is probably going to be different than maybe what the overall perspective might be, just because you're able to dig a little bit deeper. Mm-hmm. And I bring that up only because I think that so much of what law enforcement does is being impacted by the 24/7 news cycle and what people, and of course, in the Minneapolis metro area, everything is clouded by the incidents that happened in Minneapolis last summer. So I totally appreciate that. Any reaction to that, or any other thoughts you want to add?
No, I don't think so, Matt. But like I said, it's the other two panel members are talking about it. It's an exciting time, and the funny thing is that it is, and the profession is continuing to morph. And I think back to when I first started, the officers that retired on my day one wouldn't even recognize the way we do policing today. And that's probably true the way it's going to be done 20 years from now. Officers that retire today won't recognize the field 20 years from now. That said, that's a good thing, because that is reacting to what the community wants, what the citizens want us to be doing. So it's good.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. And so true. So true. The changes that have happened in all aspects of local government, but particularly in police departments, have been huge. So thank you, Brad. Captain Canfield, what tools and methods do you use to understand resident expectations and priorities regarding local police services in Mountain View?
Certainly, some of what we do is online and kind of efficiency driven. We have an online portal where any number of services or concerns can be brought to the city's attention, whether it's public works, trash collection, or police services, traffic enforcement. So we have an easy to notify us method for knowing what services residents need. But prior to the pandemic, probably the most effective tool that we used was our community engagement, things as simple as coffee with a cop, but specifically targeting the communities that we were engaging with. So sending them to a Mexican and Latin American grocery store, to the senior center, as well as to different Starbucks and locations throughout our city, gave us a great opportunity to hear the stories and the lived experiences from our community members, so that when we're looking at concerns and complaints, it wasn't just data driven, it was really we had a very human touch to what they needed, and provided for me some really good insights as to how best to redirect services towards those areas. Obviously, things have been made very difficult with the pandemic, and California is still, many of our businesses are still closed. Our restaurants are outdoor only in the county. But those opportunities will exist again in the future. And I anticipate that we'll be not only engaging again, but doubling down in the methods and the opportunities to physically connect and engage. I know one of the areas that we found really successful was our Spanish language leadership academies, and providing law enforcement officers who speak Spanish fluently into that course to engage and instruct and connect with our community and hear those unique needs as well. I'm really looking forward to doing more of that. And in the meantime, we'll continue to do our virtual, best practices that we do with social media and utilizing the MVPDX format that we talked about before, and even our Public Safety Advisory Board. But there's nothing that beats human interaction. So,
yeah, Mike, are you still meeting almost exclusively virtual with things that you're doing?
Correct. So we were able to, for depending on a room size, we're able to have people from 3 households in one room inside the building for non-essential operations. So we were able to do, for MVPDX, we were able to bring in one person essentially at a time in a room and connect in a large room, connect with an officer, discuss relevant aspects of both their individual background as well as the type of work they do. But it's very metered and very difficult to do in the mass that we need to do it in, and it's hard to connect. When we're doing things virtually, it's just not the same. It's okay for process stuff, but for engagement and dialogue, it's very difficult.
Yeah, no, I totally appreciate that.
It's better than the alternative of doing nothing.
True.
So.
Great. That's very true. And it just sounds like you're doing such a great job with doing things virtually and adapting to the environment.
Yeah, it's been interesting. We've found a lot of, at least for me, in my time here, some of the concerns that our community had were things that I never would have anticipated. And similar to what Chief Wise was saying, although for us, it was our school resource officer program really came under and is coming under a lot of scrutiny and review. Review, I think, is wonderful, and the scrutiny is okay as well. But being able to separate those national concerns and narratives and really provide specific insight as to how our school resource officers operate and what the culture of that unit in our department is has been really valuable. So we've been very surprised to hear that's something that we found so valuable and invested so heavily in wasn't seen and received in that way across as broad of a spectrum in our community as we would like. However, that's given us an opportunity to both retool and revisit how to connect to perhaps large groups of our students that we were not connecting to, the students that were not necessarily in need of those police services and those police mentorships and interactions, but had very strong opinions about policing on school campuses.
Well, that's very interesting. Yeah. Thank you. Gentlemen, thank you for those perspectives. Those were just excellent. I want to give you a couple of minutes just to engage with each other. If there's any conversation that you want to have, questions, follow-ups, comments on things that other communities are doing, now would be the time to do that.
I feel I'm reassured when I see guys like Mike and Brad in command of bigger departments and what they're doing. And I guess I just want to encourage anybody who feels, kind of beat up and worn out, that the question, there's only 2 questions we need to ask our community. What do you expect of us? And what can we expect of you? And when those questions are sincerely asked, listened to, and answered, that's where that trust model begins. And that's what's going to remove all this modern cynicism that we're seeing, which really, frankly, in my opinion, comes from just a byproduct of a highly communicative national culture, national society, who's more concerned about canceling out somebody than building them up and helping them learn. And so you guys you're doing great. I'm pleased to be part of that working police chief crowd yet for a while. And frankly, I would have worked for you had I had the opportunity if I was younger.
Hey, and actually, do you mind if I want to weigh in on Mike brought up we call them school liaisons officers, but resource officers. We went through the same thing here in my town. It's we have 2 high schools and 2 middle schools and another like special level 5 EBD school. So we have a total of 5 officers in schools. And there was a segment of the population that thought police don't belong in schools and they're scaring kids or something. a couple of things. First, the relationships I had with principals were essential. The high school, one of the high school principals, I've been friends with her professionally speaking for 20 years, 20 years with one of the middle school principals. A good number of the elementary principals I've known forever. The superintendent, anytime the superintendent calls me to be a part of something, I say yes. I never say no for that. And then, so when it came to criticism about school resource officers being in school, of course, I always talk about the piece for the kids. It's really very small sliver of what they do. And this is true, and I'm sure it's true in Mountain View. A small sliver is law enforcement. 80% of it is relationship building. The other 10% is probably dealing with children that are in need of protective services. But the way I said it to all the school people is, as important as the service we offer directly to you, the school, it's even more important for our officers that are in that school to get to know your kids, to know the good kids that they see every day, and to not forget that. And so it makes me crazy. So for instance, I'm going to get on my soapbox here for a second if we had a minute, but like Minneapolis and St. Paul, both of these big cities are talking about cutting services that the patrol officers do to have it just be basically responding to crimes of violence. And in my head, I'm screaming, no, don't do that to the cops in those cities. They need to go to calls for service that are disputes over mowing the grass, or your car is parked in front of my garage, or whatever it is. They need to go to those calls of service for their own mental health. And it's the same thing for those, for the kids in schools, is that the detectives that we assign to the schools, they need to have those relationships with your kids. And you just have to trust me that the officers that are in those schools, their primary focus is on building relationships and character education, teaching kids to be honest and to stand up for themselves. And it's all sort of the DARE, drug abuse resistance education, which some people think doesn't work, but that program does work when it talks about character. Maybe kids still use drugs or whatever, but the character piece and having somebody talk about those sorts of things is invaluable. So I wish you good luck out there in Mountain View, because it breaks my heart to think that some school would think that cops are somehow bad to be in their buildings.
What's really interesting too, just to build on that, Brad, is through our research nationally, both in 2018 and in 2020, and this is why it's important to get your residents' perspective. The highest priority nationally in public safety is school safety and security. Yeah, the engagement piece is the one that increased the most, but the highest priority is really that connectedness with the schools. And so as communities are making these decisions about getting out of the schools with their resource officers, it really is counter to the research that we have discovered, including the shift in perspectives over the last couple of years. So thanks for bringing that up, and thanks, Mike, for bringing that up. Anything else that anybody would like to talk about? I just really appreciate the thoughts and the perspectives that you shared. The whole notion of how you adapt to the evolving needs of a community, recognizing that the top factor is really related to building trust and building that community capital that you can only build and you can't actually borrow without it. Those kinds of things are so important. All of you brought up the importance of that intimate contact that you need to have in neighborhood meetings and in picnics and gathering with particularly your underrepresented populations in kind of creative ways to make sure that you're having that contact. But in the environment of being virtual, the virtual academy, Mike, that you're doing out in Mountain View is a great example for how you're helping to engage in the community in a creative way that is also building that great connection. All of the positive things that all of you are doing at a global level as well as on a neighborhood level have just been really helpful to hear. And I know that other communities are really going to benefit from it, as well as just recognizing the use of technology and how important that technology is now playing into your ability to have that two-way interaction, share information, get resident perspectives, all of those kinds of things. So this was just an excellent panel, and your perspectives were just super. So as we kind of wrap things up here, let me just kind of give a couple of additional pieces of information. I'm going to follow up with you and make sure that you've got connections to each other so that if you want to follow up with any questions, you got the right information. We do these every week. Every Tuesday, we meet with law enforcement leaders. And so I welcome any suggestions or ideas as to other people who would benefit from participating in this panel. We find that this is really an important way of sharing ideas and perspectives with others that are dealing with exactly the same issues that you are dealing with. So I appreciate all of your participation today. I certainly am going to be welcoming any feedback that any of you have as well. We want to always make these panels worthwhile and valuable, and anything that we can do to make it worthwhile and better, I would certainly welcome any of your thoughts and any of your perspectives. So I just want to thank all of you for being here today. Every time I do one of these panels, I really appreciate the fact that I've just made better connections with more people. And so I benefit from it just by hearing your perspectives and getting to know you at a little bit better level. So thank you very much for spending the last hour with us. It was very helpful.